Jiho adjusted his salvage scanner for the third time that morning, watching the green blips dance across his screen as he floated through what used to be the Kepler Junction trading post. 2 days ago, this had been a bustling commercial hub, where humans and Valerians conducted peaceful business. Now it was nothing but twisted metal and frozen debris, another casualty in the growing tensions between their species. The war wasn't supposed to reach civilian areas, but wars had a way of spreading like wildfire. Jiho had been salvaging in this sector for over 5 years, and he'd never seen destruction quite like this. Entire sections of the station had been vaporized, leaving behind only scattered fragments that caught the light from the nearby star. His ship, the Lucky Break, was nothing fancy. Just a modified mining vessel with oversized cargo holds and reinforced hulls for debris collection. Jiho preferred it that way. Flashy ships attracted attention, and in his line of work, attention usually meant trouble. He'd learned that lesson the hard way during his early salvaging days. The scanner chirped softly, indicating another piece of valuable salvage ahead. Jiho guided his ship closer, expecting to find another chunk of processed titanium or maybe some intact electronics. Instead, his screen showed something that made him pause. The reading was different, organic with a faint energy signature that pulsed irregularly. "What the hell?" Jiho muttered, leaning forward in his pilot seat. In 15 years of salvage work, he'd never seen a reading quite like this. The signature was too complex to be human, but it was definitely alive. Barely alive from the looks of it. He maneuvered the Lucky Break through a field of spinning debris, careful not to let any of the larger pieces scrape against his hull. The last thing he needed was a breach this far from the nearest repair station. As he got closer, the source of the reading became clear. A small escape pod, maybe Valerian design, tumbling slowly end over end. The pod's hull was cracked in several places, and its emergency beacon was dark. Whatever had happened here, this thing had been drifting for a while. Jiho's first instinct was to mark its location and move on. Valerian escape pods meant Valerian survivors, and getting involved with alien refugees was a good way to end up in trouble with both governments. But something about the weak life sign made him hesitate. His scanner showed the occupants vital, signs failing rapidly. Whoever was in there wouldn't last much longer without help. Jiho had always prided himself on being practical above all else. In space, sentiment could get you killed faster than equipment failure, but he'd also never been able to ignore someone in genuine need, regardless of their species. It was a character flaw that had cost him more than once, though he'd never quite managed to fix it. He activated his ship's mechanical arm and carefully grasped the escape pod, drawing it into his cargo hold. The moment the bay doors sealed and atmosphere returned, he was grabbing his toolkit and heading back to investigate. The pod's emergency systems were completely dead, and Jiho had to manually override the hatch release. When it finally cracked open with a hiss of escaping gases, he found himself looking at something he'd only seen in news broadcasts: a living Valerian. She was young, probably equivalent to a human in her early 20s, with the pale blue skin, characteristic of her species. But that skin, which should have been vibrant and almost luminescent, was now a sickly gray color. Her breathing was so shallow that Jiho had to watch carefully to see her chest rise and fall. The Valerians had a crystalline-based biology that was completely different from human physiology. Their bodies processed energy through specialized organs that looked almost like gems embedded beneath their skin. But this girl's crystal organs were dark and cracked, clear signs of severe radiation exposure. Jiho had seen enough Valerian medical reports during his military service to know what this meant. Radiation poisoning was essentially a death sentence for her species. Their medical technology couldn't reverse the damage once it reached this stage. Something about how the radiation disrupted their energy processing systems at a cellular level. But Jiho had never been one to accept impossible odds. During his service years, he'd seen human medics save people who should have died according to every medical textbook. Sometimes stubborn determination could accomplish what advanced technology couldn't. He carefully lifted the unconscious Valerian and carried her to his ship's small medical bay, his mind already racing through possibilities. He might not know anything about alien biology, But he knew about radiation exposure, and he knew about not giving up on people who still had fight left in them. Ji-ho spent the first 12 hours trying everything he could think of. His ship's medical bay wasn't designed for alien physiology, but he figured basic life support principles had to be universal. He started with oxygen levels, then moved to temperature control, trying to find something that might help stabilize the dying Valerian. Nothing worked. If anything, she seemed to be getting worse. Her skin had turned from gray to an almost translucent white, and those crystal-like organs under her skin were growing darker by the hour. Ji-ho had downloaded every piece of Valerian medical information he could find in his ship's database, but most of it was classified or too technical for someone without xenobiology training. By the second day, he was getting desperate. The girl, he'd started thinking of her as barely more than a kid, was clearly running out of time. Her breathing had become even more labored, and sometimes she'd stop breathing entirely for several seconds before starting again. That's when Ji-ho remembered the electromagnetic therapy unit he'd installed after injuring his back in a salvage accident last year. The device was designed to stimulate human cellular repair using controlled electromagnetic pulses. It had helped his damaged vertebrae heal faster than conventional treatment. He stared at the device for a long time, weighing the risks. Using untested medical equipment on an alien could kill her faster than the radiation poisoning. But she was dying anyway, and he was out of conventional options. "Well, girl," he said to the unconscious Valerian, "I hope your people and mine aren't as different as everyone thinks." He started with the lowest possible setting, placing the electromagnetic field generator near her arm and watching her vital signs on his monitor. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the readings began to change. The crystal organs under her skin, which had been completely dark, began to show the faintest glimmer of light. Ji-ho held his breath, afraid that moving might somehow break whatever was happening. Over the next hour, the improvement became undeniable. Her breathing steadied, and some color began to return to her skin. The electromagnetic therapy was somehow jump-starting her cellular repair systems in a way that even advanced Valerian medicine couldn't achieve. Ji-ho spent the next 2 days fine-tuning the treatment, adjusting the frequency and intensity based on her body's responses. It was like learning to play a musical instrument by ear. He had no manual to follow, just the feedback from her improving condition. On the third day, she opened her eyes. Ji-ho was adjusting the therapy settings when he heard a soft sound behind him. He turned to find the Valerian staring at him with large violet-colored eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. For a moment, neither of them moved. He could see the exact moment when recognition hit her. Her eyes widened with what looked like fear, and she tried to push herself up on the medical table. Her movements were still weak, but there was definitely panic in her expression. "Easy," Ji-ho said, holding up his hands to show he wasn't holding any weapons. "You're safe. You're on my ship." She said something in her own language, a series of musical tones that sounded almost like singing. When he didn't respond, she tried again in broken human standard language. "You, human," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I'm human. My name is Ji-ho. I found you in an escape pod." He gestured toward the electromagnetic therapy device. "You were dying from radiation poisoning. I've been trying to help you recover." Her gaze moved to the medical equipment, then back to his face. He could see her trying to process what had happened. Among her people, humans had a reputation as the violent ones, the species that solved problems with force rather than diplomacy. While she recovered enough strength to sit up, Ji-ho worked on retrieving data from her damaged escape pod. Most of the memory cores were fried, but he managed to salvage the emergency log recordings. What he found made his blood run cold. The recordings showed the interior of a Valerian military vessel during what appeared to be a heated argument. The girl, her name was Nari, according to the pod's registration, was speaking passionately to a group of senior officers. Even without understanding her language, Ji-ho could hear the desperation in her voice. The ship's translation system filled in the gaps. Nari had discovered that her unit was planning to attack civilian evacuation ships and blame the destruction on human forces. She was pleading with her commanders to reconsider, arguing that targeting innocent people would make them no better than the worst stereotypes about humans. The recording ended with Nari being forcibly escorted from the bridge. The next entry showed her being sealed into the escape pod against her will, jettisoned into space while the ship jumped to hyperspace. Her own people had left her to die for refusing to participate in a war crime. When Jiho showed Nari the recovered recordings, he watched her face crumble as the reality set in. She had maintained her principles and tried to prevent innocent deaths, and her reward was abandonment in the cold vacuum of space. Meanwhile, a human, one of the supposedly violent ones, had risked his own safety to save her life using methods her own advanced medical technology couldn't match. Over the following week, Nari watched Jiho transform his entire ship to accommodate her needs. She had expected him to provide basic life support and nothing more. After all, she was technically his enemy. Instead, she witnessed something that challenged everything she'd been taught about human nature. Jiho spent hours researching Valerian dietary requirements, modifying his food processor to create nutrition paste that wouldn't poison her crystalline-based biology. When he discovered that standard human lighting caused her discomfort, he rewired the entire medical bay with softer spectrum bulbs. He even figured out how to adjust the ship's artificial gravity to the lighter setting her species preferred. "You don't have to do all this," Nari told him one morning as he struggled to install a humidity control system. Her human language skills were improving daily, though she still spoke with the musical accent of her people. Jiho looked up from his work, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, I do. You're stuck on my ship until you're healthy enough to figure out what comes next. Might as well make you comfortable." But Nari could see it was more than simple hospitality. Jiho approached each modification like a puzzle he was determined to solve. When something didn't work the first time, he'd try again. When that failed, he'd research alternative approaches. He never showed frustration or impatience, even when a particular solution took him 3 attempts to get right. The most remarkable thing was how he treated her failed attempts to help. Valerian hands weren't designed for human tools, and her unfamiliarity with his ship's systems made her clumsy. When she accidentally short-circuited a control panel while trying to assist, Jiho simply fixed it and showed her the correct procedure. "My people would have scolded me for such clumsiness," Nari admitted after breaking another small component. "Good thing I'm not your people," Jiho replied, already reaching for his repair kit. "Besides, you're learning faster than I did when I first started working on ships." It was during these quiet days that Nari began to understand why humans had been so successful in space, despite their relatively primitive technology. They didn't give up, ever. If one approach failed, they tried another. If equipment broke, they fixed it or built something new. Where her people might see an impossible problem, humans saw an interesting challenge. Their peaceful routine was shattered on the 8th day when Jiho's proximity alarms began screaming. 3 ships dropping out of hyperspace, Jiho announced, his fingers flying over the sensor controls. Valerian military configuration. They're running deep scans of the debris field. Nari's blood went cold. She moved to the sensor display and confirmed her worst fears. The ship configurations matched those of her former unit. The same people who had tried to kill her were now searching for evidence of her survival. "They're looking for my escape pod," she said quietly. "If they find traces of it in your cargo bay." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Jiho would be arrested as either a spy or a pirate, and she would be taken back to face execution for her refusal to participate in war crimes. "The nebula," Nari said suddenly, pointing to a swirling cloud formation on the star chart. "The Crimson Reach. My people avoid it because our sensors can't penetrate ion interference." Jiho studied the chart, his expression skeptical. "That thing stretches for 3 light hours. Even if we could hide in there, how would we navigate without sensors?" "Valerian ships can't," Nari explained, her mind racing through tactical possibilities. "But human ships use different sensor technology. Your gravitic arrays might work where our crystalline sensors fail. It was a desperate plan, but they were out of alternatives. The patrol ships were already moving in their direction, following the trail of debris from Nari's original escape pod. Jiho fired up the Lucky Break's engines and set course for the nebula at maximum acceleration. Behind them, the Valerian ships altered course to intercept, their superior speed quickly closing the distance. "They're gaining on us," Jiho muttered, pushing his engines beyond their safety limits. 30 degrees starboard, Nari called out, monitoring the tactical display. "There's a gravitational anomaly that will mask our engine signature." Jiho didn't question her guidance. He threw the ship into a sharp turn that had both of them pressed against their acceleration couches. The maneuver worked. The pursuing ships overshot their position and had to slow down to search for them again. As they plunged into the nebula's swirling gases, Jiho's sensors began picking up gravitational currents that were invisible to Valerian technology. Meanwhile, Nari used her knowledge of her people's search patterns to predict where the patrol ships would look next. "Left corridor, then drop down 17 degrees, she advised as they navigated between massive gas formations. "They'll expect us to take the direct route." For the next 2 hours, they played a deadly game of cat and mouse through the nebula's twisting passages. Jiho's piloting skills kept them from crashing into hidden asteroids, while Nari's tactical knowledge kept them ahead of their pursuers. Finally, they emerged on the far side of the nebula to find empty space. The patrol ships were still somewhere, behind them, struggling to navigate the same passages that had nearly claimed the Lucky Break several times. "We did it," Jiho said, hardly believing they'd survived. Nari looked at him with something approaching wonder. "We did it together. Neither of us could have escaped alone." 3 days into their journey toward neutral space, Nari finally told Jiho the complete truth about why her own people had tried to kill her. They were sitting in the Lucky Break's small galley, sharing a meal of modified nutrition paste that Jiho had somehow managed to make almost palatable. The civilian evacuation. "Ships weren't the real target," Nari began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My unit was planning something much worse." Jiho set down his spoon, giving her his full attention. Over the past week, he'd learned to read her expressions, and right now she looked terrified. "There's a Valerian colony called Haven's Rest," she continued. 50,000 civilians, mostly families with children. My commanders received orders to destroy the entire settlement and make it look like a human attack. The words hit Jiho like a physical blow. 50,000 people? Why would they kill their own citizens? To justify a full-scale war, Nari explained, her crystalline skin flickering with distress patterns. "The military faction that's taken control of our government needs a reason to convince our people that humans are monsters. What better proof than the massacre of an entire colony?" Jiho felt sick. He'd served in the human military for 6 years and had seen his share of ugly politics, but orchestrating the murder of your own civilians was beyond anything he could imagine. "I was assigned to the technical team," Nari went on. "My job was to modify our weapon signatures to match human energy patterns. When I realized what we were really doing, I tried to report it through proper channels." "Let me guess," Jiho said grimly. "The proper channels were part of the conspiracy." Nari nodded. "Everyone I contacted either ignored my reports or actively threatened me. Finally, I managed to copy the operational files and tried to contact moderate voices in our parliament. That's when they decided I was too dangerous to leave alive." She activated a small data crystal she'd been carrying, projecting a holographic display of military documents and communication logs. Even without understanding the Valerian text, Jiho could see enough technical specifications and target coordinates to understand the scope of the planned atrocity. "This is evidence of genocide," he said, staring at the projected data. "If we could get this to the right people—" "Both governments want us dead now," Nari interrupted. "The Valerian extremists obviously want to silence me, but your human intelligence services have also classified us as threats. They think you're either a spy or that I've compromised you." As if to prove her point, Jiho's communication array suddenly lit up with an incoming transmission on a military frequency he recognized. The face that appeared on his screen belonged to Commander Park, his former superior officer from his service. "Days. Jiho, we know you're out there." Park's voice was stern, but not entirely unfriendly. "You need to turn yourself in immediately. The Valerian you're harboring is a known terrorist operative." Jiho looked at Nari, who was listening to the translation with growing alarm. "They've been fed false information about me," she said quietly. "Commander, that's not true," Jiho responded. "She's trying to prevent a war crime, not commit one." "Son, I've known you for 10 years and I'm trying to help you here," Park replied. "Bring the alien to the nearest human outpost and we'll sort this out. But if you keep running, both our governments are going to assume the worst." Jiho cut the transmission and turned to Nari. "How long before they implement this false flag operation?" "The attack on Haven's Rest was scheduled for next week," she said, checking the calendar display. "But with my escape, they might accelerate the timeline." Jiho stood up and began pacing the small galley. His salvage operator mind was already working through the logistics of their situation. They had evidence that could prevent a war, but no way to deliver it to anyone who would believe them. "We need more proof," he said finally. "Something so undeniable that both sides will have to listen." Over the next several hours, they worked together to analyze the captured data and cross-reference it with publicly available information. Nari's knowledge of Valerian military procedures combined with Jiho's understanding of human intelligence gathering methods allowed them to piece together a larger picture. The conspiracy wasn't limited to the attack on Haven's Rest. They found evidence of multiple planned false flag operations, each designed to escalate tensions between the species. Someone was deliberately pushing both civilizations toward a war that would devastate entire star systems. "Look at this," Jiho said, pointing to a series of financial transactions buried in the data. "Someone's been funding extremist groups on both sides. The same shadow organization is arming human separatists and Valerian warhawks." Nari studied the financial records with growing horror. "These aren't government accounts. This is coming from private sources, war profiteers who want to sell weapons to both sides." They spent the next day gathering additional evidence from salvaged wreckage in nearby systems, following the money trail and documenting connections between the conspirators. But their investigation didn't go unnoticed. Both human and Valerian hunter-killer teams were now actively pursuing them, with orders to capture or eliminate them before they could expose the truth. Jiho found himself piloting through increasingly dangerous situations, relying on Nari's tactical knowledge and his own stubborn refusal to give up. The clock was ticking toward the planned destruction of Haven's Rest, and they were running out of time to save 50,000 innocent lives. With less than 48 hours before the planned attack on Haven's Rest, Jiho made a decision that went against every instinct he'd developed during his years as a salvage operator. Instead of running or hiding, he flew straight toward the most dangerous place in the galaxy for them: the neutral zone where representatives from both governments were meeting for trade negotiations. "This is insane," Nari said as they approached the heavily guarded diplomatic station. "Both sides have kill orders out on us. Sometimes insane is the only option left," Jiho replied, his hands steady on the controls despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "We can't save those 50,000 people by playing it safe." The station's security forces immediately surrounded the lucky break with armed escorts. But Jiho had sent an emergency broadcast on all frequencies before they could be silenced. Every diplomat, journalist, and military observer on the station heard Nari's testimony and saw the evidence they'd gathered. The reaction was explosive. Within hours, moderate leaders from both governments were demanding investigations, while the extremist faction scrambled to discredit the evidence. But Jiho and Nari had done their homework too well. The financial records, communication logs, and operational plans formed an unbreakable chain of proof. The planned attack on Haven's Rest was called off with just 12 hours to spare. What followed was the most intensive investigation in interstellar history. Teams of forensic accountants and military investigators from both species worked together to unravel the conspiracy. They discovered that the shadow organization behind the false flag operations had been planning to profit from a decades-long war by selling weapons and supplies to both sides. Commander Park, who had been genuinely trying to help Jiho, personally apologized when the truth came out. "You did the right thing, son," he said during a secure communication, "though I still think you're crazy for the way you went about it." The exposure of the conspiracy triggered massive political changes on both sides. The Valerian extremist faction collapsed when their war-profiteering connections became public knowledge. Several high-ranking human officials who had been unknowingly manipulated by the Shadow Organization resigned in disgrace. For Nari, the revelations were bittersweet. She was vindicated, but many of her former colleagues had been killed or imprisoned by the extremists before the truth came out. The few survivors welcomed her back as a hero, but she found herself changed by her experiences with Jiho. "They want me to return to military service," she told Jiho as they sat in the Lucky Breaks galley 6 months later. "Full reinstatement, with promotion to senior tactical advisor." "That's great," Jiho said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely happy about the news. "You'd be helping to build the new cooperative defense agreements." Nari studied his face carefully. Over the months they'd spent together, she'd learned to read human expressions almost as well as she could read her own people's color patterns. "Or," she said slowly, "I could stay here and help you expand your salvage operation. You've been talking about getting a second ship." Jiho looked up in surprise. "You'd want to stay in the salvage business? After everything that's happened, you could write your own ticket with either government." "The salvage business brought us together," Nari replied with what Jiho had learned was her version of a smile. "And I've discovered that I like solving practical problems more than political ones." The truth was, both of them had been changed by their partnership. Jiho had always been a loner, preferring the solitude of space to the complications of dealing with other people. But working with Nari had shown him the value of having someone who complemented his skills, rather than competing with them. For Nari, Jiho represented something she'd never encountered in Valerian society. Someone who judged others by their actions rather than their status or species. His matter-of-fact acceptance of her as an equal partner had been more healing than any diplomatic recognition. Their story spread throughout both civilizations, becoming a symbol of what cooperation between species could accomplish. Schools taught about the human salvage operator and the Valerian tactical officer who had prevented a war through simple decency and stubborn determination. The Lucky Break became famous throughout the sector, and Jiho found himself turning down lucrative contracts from beings who wanted to hire the legendary partnership. He and Nari preferred to stick with honest salvage work, though they occasionally took on jobs that helped other refugees or survivors of various conflicts. "You know what I think our real achievement was?" Jiho asked Nari one evening as they watched the stars through the Lucky Break's observation port. "Preventing a war that would have killed millions?" she suggested. "Well, yeah, that too." Jiho grinned. "But I was thinking more about proving that two completely different people can work together when they focus on what needs to be done instead of what makes them different." Nari's skin flickered with the warm patterns that indicated contentment. "My people have a saying, the strongest crystal is formed when different elements unite under pressure." "Humans have a similar saying," Jiho replied, "though ours involves something about not judging books by their covers." They both laughed, and somewhere in the distance another ship transmitted a distress signal that would need their attention tomorrow.